Welcome to The Roll Forward, a podcast for the next wave of finance leaders, especially those looking to transform their roles by making smarter, faster, and more profitable business decisions using the power of technology and a forward-looking approach to finance. Listen in to learn how to get out of the back office trenches and become a more strategic partner within your organization.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Roll Forward podcast. My name is Joe Michalowski, and this episode is brought to you by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. Joined, as always, on the podcast by Joe Garafalo, our COO and co-founder. And today, our guest is Temi Vasco, the controller at Gem, a recruiting platform that acts as a talent acquisition CRM. Temi, thanks so much for joining today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So before we sort of get rolling, Temi, can you just give a quick background on who you are, what your experience is, what you do at Gem, things like that?
Okay. Well, I am the controller at Gem, and I've been there for about 2 years. I'm very proud of the fact that I'm the first accounting hire. So background. My 2 years of Gem have gone really fast. So the first year, we focused mainly on compliance and bringing our accounting in-house because it was outsourced prior to me joining the company. And we also spent some time layering some complexity in our financials, like just putting in departments and cost centers and things like that. You know, big company moves. This year has been mostly focused on just regulatory compliance, so sales and use tax, making sure that our benefits taxes are creating structure around our close process, trying to get our financial reporting all squared away. So a lot more internal facing work has been going on. Prior to that, I was the assistant controller at Checker for about a year, another SaaS company. If you don't know Checker, check them out. Pun intended. But prior to that, I've worked in so many different industries. I started out in oil and gas and chemical manufacturing, of all places. So highly regulated industries, right? And I did work with a company that did deep water drilling as well. But my start was really at KPMG. I started out auditing public companies as well as benefit plans. So it gave me a really wide range of customers, quote unquote clients, to look at. In addition to that, I'm a wife and mom of 2 kids that are growing way too fast.
Awesome. I totally forgot that Joe is also a KPMG alum. I think we've talked about this before, but
that's right.
Totally forgot about that. So awesome to have that little mind meld going on at the beginning of the podcast. Love it. So cool. Thanks so much again for joining. You know, the idea behind having you on this podcast, aside from, just your background and the great work you're doing at Gem, is that, we did a webinar a while back and it was about future-proofing the finance function. And one thing that you really lit up about was bringing automation and tech and greater efficiency to the work you do in accounting, the work that the larger finance function does. And so just to start things off as we talk about this topic, I'd love to hear kind of your mindset around why you love that topic so much, why you love efficiency, what it is about that side of things that you really love working on.
So background in, public companies. One of the things that I think it really is a great background to have is being able to kind of peek into all these different microcosms, and you get to go to these different companies and you see how everyone's trying to achieve the same thing, but they're doing it in such unique ways, right? And for me, that experience was very helpful in shaping my idea of what should just work. Being on the other side of it, right? You're just receiving the reports at the end and you're wondering, why is it taking so long? Well, once I got into industry, I figured out, why did things take so long and why it was so complex and why. So from just my experience and having pain points personally, I've been a staff, I've been a senior accountant, I've been an accounting manager, supervisor. it's just hard to get some things done without the right tools, right? And so for me, I started doing a lot of research and trying to just figure out ways to make my job easier, make my life easier, and hopefully make the company's life just a little bit better. I really believe that the future of work is automation. We have it so much in just our everyday lives. You think about the last 100 years, where we were then and where we are now, how we have so much information out there. You could literally get a degree by watching YouTube videos now. Don't do that. Nobody should do that. But my point is, there's so much information readily available that it really does shorten the curve, right, when it comes to scaling and growing. There's a joke at Gem where we call ourselves Team Skynet, because we're like, we want the bots to literally come and do all the grunt work so that we can literally up level. So, and then we also have, just the way things are now. Not only are we using technology and just the little things, if you think about just using your phone, you can improve documents, signed documents on your phone now. 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of. What? You don't have ink? And then there's also, there's a huge pressure on CFOs now to not just be funding sourcers, but to be like true strategic business partners. And accounting has a huge part to play in that, because our job is to provide relevant, dependable information so that we can make those decisions, right, for the business. And so that part of the puzzle, especially when you're looking at historical data, I mean, there's really no reason other than lack of resources or lack of knowledge to not automate most of the things that we do. And also my personality has a little bit to do with it. So if you ever taken any of the Myers-Briggs personality tests, I'm INFP. So intuitives are mostly focused, not always, but we tend to think about potential possibilities, like what's possible. And so if you give me a process, I'm happy to do it your way the first time. But as I'm doing it, I'm like, this doesn't really feel great. Why can't we? So you can see why I had to get out of auditing. So it's not really good when your senior starts questioning how you did things last year and the year before. Why don't you just do this? And everyone's like, no, you follow the document, right?
Same as last year.
Same as last year, right? And it's one of my pet peeves. It's just, it doesn't always work. Yes, last year was fine, but think about even now with COVID, pre-COVID, how we had to change how we work in such a drastically short time, right? We had to really, really pivot quickly. Imagine not being able to do that because we just didn't have the technology resources, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just passionate. You can tell I love it. I think it's the wave of the future, right?
Yeah.
And I still think there's room for us too. Like even if the bots come, they can do the grunt work, but you're still going to need someone that's going to look at all those exception items and make decisions and be able to do that in a way that's not just repetitive or programmable, because they might not always have the context, right? The broader context of the business, of what has changed the business. So I think there's room for the bots in us, frankly.
I love all that. I'm a proud INFJ over here. I write for most of my time, and so bots try to take over my writing job as well, and there will be room for me here. So I'm glad there's room for all of us as we automate these things. I think, I know that you could go on and on about 1,000 different things we could automate or manual tasks that we could like fix in finance and accounting. But I wanted to zero in on specifically like a big pain point for accounting teams, especially as we come to the end of the year here. It's the close process, and we can talk about like the month-end close. And really, I think where I wanted to start was like, why is the month-end close specifically like so ripe for automation and efficiency? Like, why is this kind of ground zero for accounting teams to automate stuff?
So I think anytime you try to automate anything, there are typically specific things I look for. Is it repetitive? So are you doing the same thing the same way over and over again? If it's repetitive, odds are you could find a way to automate. If not the whole thing, then maybe parts of it. The other part is, does it require structure? And accounting is one of those it's just one of those, not just the industry, but the work itself does require some structure to it, because every change you make has to be somewhat auditable, or you have to be able to follow the breadcrumbs, right, to get to the financials at some point. And so when you have those two in tandem, where it's repetitive and it requires structure, then having some form of automation around it lends itself to that naturally, right? And then it's also everyone's problem. Like I literally tell people all the time, like, one of the great things about the accounting industry is that there's such huge job security. Like, even when a company is ramping down and they're shutting down the doors, they still need at least one accountant to say, yes, they shut it down right. so there's always the need, right? And it's every business you have has an accounting problem. They might not know it yet, or they might be punting it down the line, but it is part of the process. So, and with that, I mentioned YouTube, how you could literally get a degree via YouTube videos. Don't do it again. But my point is, we're so used to getting information when we need it immediately. There's this sense of urgency when we want information, and we want it right now. And the close process is a part of that, because essentially we're providing you information on how we did. How close are we to our goals, right? Think of your burn, or even just US GAAP, or you're filing stuff with the SEC, 10Ks, 10Qs. I shouldn't say stuff. I'm trying to be more specific in my language. But my point is, you will have that issue at some point. And so if you have a repetitive task that everyone is waiting on, they want that information now, and you require structure, right, to present it, why? It literally is begging for that, you know?
Yeah. And I'll add to that too, Temi. I think it's kind of like this hidden secret that everyone has their own bespoke process and feels like they need to reinvent the wheel. Whenever you join a new company as an accountant, you create that month-end close calendar and that checklist, and you do all these manual processes. But if you can zoom out for a second, you can realize, like, there is structure and repeatability that software may be able to help automate.
I love all that. I think you guys are obviously spot on. Like, I love that idea of, like, this being a bespoke process, because from the outside looking in, it just seems like something that would be, especially if we're talking about like repetitive task automation, that it would be pretty standard. Like, I could just say, what's the checklist? And you could give me the rundown. But I like that we'll be able to get into in a little bit, like how to build that bespoke process and like what the kind of standard pieces are. But I think like one thing I want to ask and get context about is like, what is the pain point? Like, when your close process is inefficient, or if it's slow, if it's taking you too long to close the books, like how does that inefficiency hurt the company? Like, where do you need to improve to like add value to the business? Like, how does it hurt?
I'll say, first of all, it's just, if the financials aren't done correctly, or the process is mismanaged, I always call it, you get too much too late. Like, you have all this information that comes all at once, but it's kind of whatever the issues were that you were trying to resolve, or even to maybe change your trajectory, it's so far down the line that the error has now become embedded, right? So if you think of trying to make decisions for whether it's funding, you're trying to check, do you have enough money to pay the bills, right? Your financials don't really help you if they're 3 weeks down the line, because you needed to make that decision 3 weeks ago. So how does that information help you make better decisions for your business if it's so far down? And most close processes are, at least when I started with Gem, and again, it was outsourced, we didn't have our close done until 15 working days, right, after. So imagine 3 weeks. 3 weeks where you're just in limbo and you're just doing what you're doing. If you had to course correct any issue, it would literally have gone on for 3 weeks, right? I mean, so think about it that way. And for a small, nimble right? We're no longer that small. But for a SaaS company that's nimble and really prides itself on enabling people to make really good decisions based on data and data driven, that's a long time to wait. That's a long time to make the same mistakes over and over, right? Or even not course correct. So it's usually like that. All of a sudden, everything's done, close is done, boom, everything goes out, and people are like, wait. I now have to fix something, but now I'm not just fixing last month. I'm literally fixing last month and the 3 weeks for this current month. So it's not always helpful. And then the second part of it is really just having wrong information. If your close process isn't standardized or you don't have specific paths to follow, something might fall through the cracks. And when it does, you can make bad decisions based on that. And in all fairness, you're making the best decision based on the information you have at that time, but your information is wrong, then odds are your decision, even if it's not wrong, it's not the best, right? So it becomes like this crapshoot. And so for me, for my role, I feel like my job is to make sure that I provide information for people to make good decisions for the business.
Yep.
If my close process is inefficient, it really doesn't help me do that job. Right. And then it's a failure on my part. And nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to fail, Joe. Nobody wants to fail.
Totally. Joe, is there anything like you've seen this from both sides now, like as the founder role or the sort of C-suite versus like when you were doing operational finance? Like what have you seen now running Mosaic like as the challenge there? Like are there inefficiencies you notice now as COO that you maybe didn't notice when you were on the finance side that are hurting or not helping Mosaic?
Yeah, when I was on the finance side, you're so much closer to the transactions, the daily transactions, and what's happening, like, beneath the surface. And when you get the financials, you can easily look at them, but you may not know what's missing, right? So like one area that always gives me a lot of trepidation is like accruals. It's like what bill didn't come in that I know is probably not on the financial statements, and is what the financials are telling me accurate about what we spent or like, what we earned from our customers over the last month or quarter. So just being able to rely on the financials for accuracy and giving you that rhythm of the business is sometimes hard if there's an inefficient close or a close process that maybe you can't trust fully.
Totally. And absolutely, it leads right into the topic that we were discussing earlier and that we wanted to bring up was, we're obviously going to get into some of the tech side of this and the automation. I know that's what's near and dear to your heart, Temi, but there are pieces of the close that you can't automate, and accruals sounds like it's one of them. Is like there's not going to be a tool that you can just solve for that problem that Joe was just talking about. And so can you talk a bit about what the process is for you at Gem, like how you handle accruals, when's the right time to start accruing expenses? Like how do you handle that more manual approach when your instinct is to automate and make everything as efficient as possible?
So for me, we try to automate parts of it, right? So there are parts of it that we can control. We use Flowcast, and Flowcast came out with this remind feature, which is essentially a way to send emails to your vendors, or you have a vendor list, right, for recurring vendors, and remind them, hey, can you send me your invoice, or can you tell me what's past due? We have Asana as well, so we'll put in reminders that way to kind of say, hey, you need to check this. So parts of it we've been able to semi-automate, but it's still not by any means the best process. I think for our purposes as well, the other part is really just being in touch with our numbers and knowing what's supposed to be coming down the pipeline. And that's really hard to do in a silo. So it does require really partnering with all of the other departments and all the teams and knowing what the plans are, right? One of the things that we were able to do was get like a marketing calendar going. So like we can see, we don't have to go ping someone and say, so what's happening with marketing this month? Can you tell, can you tell us? So our discussions are a little bit more advanced in terms of, hey, we know these events are coming down the pipeline. Can we get an idea of what the vendors are? And then we can be on the lookout for that. Or we know what your budget is. Are you going to maintain that budget? Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is constant communication, right? Just trying to get ahead of it. There is a tool called Accruals that is supposed to help with that. I haven't used it. But again, this is what I do on my time off. But their goal is to essentially help with that process of trying to make sure that you kind of have your arms around what you need to accrue or what invoices haven't come in. The only shortfall I see with that is that it would need to be somehow embedded into some kind of approval or purchase order or budgeting process for it to really like take off the ground.
Yeah, purchase orders helped us so much at Palantir when we didn't have them. It was hard because you had to have all those one-on-one conversations with all the different department heads every single month. And if you missed one of those conversations, there could be a hole in the numbers. But as soon as we got everything on purchase orders, the problem got a lot easier. But that is like a big company-wide process change that takes like almost a year to probably get through the correct way.
I will say I've seen some tools that have like a light PO purchase order process. It's not as rigorous in terms of three-way matching, and it's not always exact, but at least they kind of get ahead of the curve in the sense that people can start putting in, what I call the wish list. Hey, this is going to come down. Can I get approval for this? The issue with those though is that so far it's been vendor specific, and I would love to have something that is not just vendor specific, but also maybe like for marketing, you might not even know who your vendor is, but you have a budget. Can we have something that would, anyway, I'll start getting to the nitty gritty, but yeah, a purchase order system will help.
Awesome.
Definitely. And you mentioned something there too, Temi, about like budgeting. It sounds like you're probably pretty close with your finance team along with your different department heads. Can you talk about what a good relationship between those three teams looks like?
Oh my goodness. So it's pretty much hand in glove, right? If you have a really strong finance team that partners really well with accounting, it really gives the department heads a seamless feel in terms of getting historical information and looking at like forward facing or forecasting. And that's been tricky. It hasn't always been the case. I've lucked out. Our now CFO used to be our VP Finance, and she's very, very good about transparency. That's one of Gem's values, by the way. It's just making sure that the information is out there and you know what your budget is. You understand what the ramifications are when you're making those business decisions of, what do I have? It's not, do I have enough money to spend this? Is I know what I have to spend. Will this actually fill the need that I have? So she's been really great about that. But I would say that the hardest places that I've worked that has been really, really difficult for me has been where finance and accounting just are siloed. Without that deep connectivity in terms of communication, transparency, constant communication, the department heads have a really difficult time really getting that full picture that I want them to have. And so, yeah, it's invaluable, Joe. I've left those places. So that should tell you everything. Like if it's not going to work, and it really is a culture shift too. It's not just the controller and the VP finance working together. It has to trickle all the way down. Otherwise, it's really difficult to shift the needle if it's not a culturally embedded ideology.
I love that. How often do you guys meet with your finance teams? Is it like a bi-weekly, weekly, monthly cadence?
I Slack everybody all the time. I wish I could say. So One of the things that I really appreciate about COVID is the idea that it brought to everyone's forefront this idea of like meeting fatigue, because you're on the screen. But even before screens, I'm also one of those people where I'm like, can we have a short conversation? Do we need a full 30, 45 minutes to discuss something? And will it be a working meeting? Because I break out in hives when someone says, "Oh, let's meet for an hour," and there's no agenda. I have no idea how to prepare. It really stresses me out. So we don't actually have a cadence for meeting because we're constantly meeting. And I think even if we did get to the point where we had structured meetings, I'd probably be one of those people who would say, "What's on the agenda? What do we need to read before we show up? Can we let's prepare so that when we meet, it's as productive as possible. I don't want to sit here while you're still talking about the possibilities. Let's get together and work." And so let's just say at this point, if I had to look in my Slack to see what I can find everything in Slack. And that's another thing about meetings too. Sometimes it's helpful to come together and work on something and have something productive, but rarely do we come. My thing is I want an action list. What are we doing after this, right? When we leave, we should know who's doing what when and the timeline for that. And in the past, I've been burned with just sloppy meeting rigor. So when we do meet, it's typically productive. We've worked through it. We have a checklist on who's doing what when, and we're good to go. So for me, continuous meetings are pretty much it, but it's easier because it's literally via Slack or via email. And when we do meet, I'd say maybe every 2 weeks, but sometimes we don't even need to meet because we've already talked about it and resolved whatever it is, so we're good to go. In terms of meeting with department heads, we try to do that at least once a month. But honestly, once COVID hit, it was literally, here's your financials, here's your budget. What do you think? Back and forth on questions, we review a couple of things, done. And I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe we didn't need that 1 hour meeting to review. Yeah. But yeah, so contact better. You know what? It works. It works. I wouldn't say it would work for every company because I realize the larger we get, the more invested people might be in having that face-to-face communication and having more touch points. But right now, I'm trying to set up on demand, right? So you have the information, you get it, you come to me if you have specific questions, but we're not going to do that. Well, how am I doing this month? That's like the worst thing you can tell an accountant, especially before close.
Exactly. I love hearing you both talk about like systems, processes, and obviously if we're talking about automation, like that's a big part of it, and just making sure that you have that on-demand information in place. And so I want to use this to roll into what I know is the loaded question that I wanted to ask, which is like, what is the typical month-end close process for Gem? How do you go about it? And I know it's like almost an impossible question to answer, but just to help, like high level, like what's the checklist of things you're doing, like to make sure that you stay on track with getting that information to the right people at the right times? Like where do you start, and like how do you walk through that monthly close process?
I started out mapping out our close process just based on the larger tasks. So each day we try to pick something that we kind of walk through. And I'm a big believer in, like, when you're closed, you're closed and reconciled. It's not we close the books, then we reconcile, then we do like everything. I try to have everything done at once, so we're not constantly going back, right, to the same issues. So for us, day minus one, so the day before close, that's when we're sending out emails to people saying, hey, we need this by this day. We send emails to our vendors. We typically will check in with our sales ops to make sure that there's nothing that's kind of hang up in terms of revenue. So we're pretty much just prepping. We'll roll forward our files, do all this fun stuff in Flowcast. The first day is typically cash. So we review our cash, we make sure it's reconciled. We use a lot of cash clearing accounts, so we make sure things are bucketed in the right place. And if there's any cash in transit, we make sure we know what it's related to and where it's going to go. Day 2 is typically accounting ops. So our AR, AP, making sure that's reconciled, making sure that if there's anything hanging in the balance, we resolve them. One of my pet peeves is having a reconciliation that says there's an issue that's been lingering for like months. So whatever issues that were last month, they need to have been resolved by that, right? So day 3 is typically accruals and estimates. We typically will do prepaids at the same time. So all of that. Day -1, we do anything that's already set up. So depreciation, anything that's a recurring transaction, we just have those posted automatically. Thank you, Nancy. And then day 5, we do our prelim review, as well as review our 606. So revenue recognition, commissions. We'll spend time just going through that to make sure we already have tools. We already have tools that work for that. So it's mainly just reconciling and making sure that things are the way they're supposed to. We also do any of our reasonableness tests on that day. So typically by day 5 or day 6, we have our financials in front of us. We're doing a preliminary walkthrough. We're looking at our different departments, making sure things are where they're supposed to be bucketed. And then day 6, sometimes it goes as long as day 8, especially on the quarter ends. That's when we're doing our fluxes. So we're fluxing our financials. We do month-over-month, quarter-over-quarter. Sometimes we'll do year-over-year if there's something that looks really odd in there. That's when we typically will find some adjustments that we need to make. So typically by work day 8, we're done, dusted, our financials are done, trued up, and we're ready to issue it out. That's the high level view.
Yeah.
Right? It's if my senior was here, she's gonna be like, there's a lot more to it, but typically that's what we're trying to cover on this stage.
Awesome. So I want to dig into some of that and just ask, like, I'm sure there's many different systems, and you thanked a couple of the tools that are helping you do some of these things, but I just wanted to ask, like, what are some of the tools that you've invested in to help automate aspects of those days? You know, we talked a little bit about which ones really can't be automated, but I'd love to hear, like, what tools you've put in place, how you think about the ROI of those tools, like what do you look for as you invest in things that can help you with this process?
So for ROI, I'm an accountant, so of course it all comes down to the cost. How much of it is it saving us? So in terms of the days, typically if I'm getting a tool, I'm looking at how does this replace what I'm doing right now? How much time does this save my team? And then what's the value add? Hopefully it has a value add, right? And we're not just replacing my time with a tool. We're actually doing something better, or hopefully doing bigger and better things. So I tend to look at it that way. In terms of the tools we've used, we use Mosaic for board reporting, and that's been really helpful. We've also been using it for our fluxes as well, since a lot of our data just goes directly in there, so it's easy for us to do comparisons with. Flowcast has been a game changer for us. We implemented that in April as well, and every month it just keeps getting better, frankly. We have Revlock, now called RevRec, for 606. So a lot of the headache, again, repetitive. We have a rule in place. We know it just does that for us, and it pushes our entries directly. So there's very little human intervention there. And that saved us between Mosaic. Our board reporting is now like within a day. Before that, it was a beast. Okay. For Flowcast, we were at, I think, 10 working days for close, from all the way from beginning to like issuing our reports. Now we're at 8. good months where nothing happens, we're done at 6. So we're still trying to standardize that process as well. I want to get it to 5. I want to get to 5.
Props.
I keep telling people like we want to get it to 5, but they're like, oh, 5. But I really do. I think it's definitely doable, right? For Revlock, we do like a reasonableness test for our revenue just to make sure that it's working or it's moving in the same direction as our ARR. And that way we can spot any issues that way. And that Revlog took that from like more than a day. Usually took me like a day plus sometimes, just trying to figure out what happened here, there. We're now down to like 2 hours with that, with the recording in there. So just because we have these tools in place, keeping in mind that we're doing all of this in Excel before, has really helped us like scale. And remember, it's me and a senior. Right. So like Fullcast told us like we're like their smallest accounting staff that they have ever worked with. And we're gonna grow obviously, but it's just that we can do so much because we have this technology helping us, and we can focus on those really important things, right? Like, serving our customers, who's pretty much everyone in the company, and making sure that we're partnering with them better. But I don't think it would have been possible if we didn't have that. Yeah.
I love you mentioned one thing that I have written down as a question that Joe brought up as something he really wanted to ask you about, was just like the makeup of your team. And so if you're the smallest accounting team that Flowcast is working with, I guess the question is like, how do the right hires make your close processes more efficient? Like, what advice would you give anyone to build out that team? It sounds like you've got your one report, and it's like, I know you're going to build more. Like, what's the process there?
I tend to, so right now I have a senior. She's experienced. She's done closes before. She's familiar with NetSuite, being familiar with the tools. It's not that I wouldn't hire someone that didn't have that experience. It just gives them a little bit more of a bump, right? The learning curve is a lot shorter. They're more focused on gem issues than like learning a new system, which, starting a new job is hard enough. When you have new systems in there, it just takes you a little bit longer to ramp, right? So that's one of those things. Going forward, I'm hiring for people that have that same bent, that want to make things better. I'm definitely not perfect, and I literally love it when my senior comes and says, we should fix this. I'm like, yes, go ahead, fix it. Because that's what we need, right? Someone that can have that bias for action, not just taking what is being done, but can say, you know what, there has to be a better way. Or if we haven't found a better way, can I spend some time figuring out how to do this with less human intervention? Or even if there is human intervention, maybe present it better or give more information with less of a lift. And so that's my bent. Whatever the role is, if you're curious about what you're doing, and you have that desire, not just to do, what you're told, but go above that, I'm all for it, because that makes me better, right? All of a sudden, I'm going to be learning about all this new stuff that I never knew about, simply because you have that same bias. And that's the goal. I don't care what role you are. I just want people that have that innate curiosity that says, why are we doing this? Yeah. Tell me, explain yourself, Temi.
I think that's a great explanation. I know Gem's team is going to grow more and more. And I know that's what we look for in our team. We love people that can come in and proactively solve problems rather than just like looking to be, especially in like a startup. So something like that, I know that's near and dear for Joe as we grow quickly here at Mosaic. And so, I just looked at the time. We've been going for a bit. So there's 2 higher level questions that I wanted to get to, that I wanted to get your thoughts on. The first is, we've talked a lot about automating as much as you can, getting out of the grunt work, Team Skynet. I hope you get as much out of the way as you can. I'm curious from your role. We talk a lot about strategic finance here, but it's not just like the finance team looking forward. How do you think about what you're able to do because you've made these processes more efficient? How does that make your accounting team more strategic to the business? What are you able to do because you've taken these steps?
I think I'll use an example for like accruals, right? If you have a system in place where you know what the spend is going to be, you become that source of not just data, but information, something that's actionable that people can actually do something about before it even happens. And I think that's the potential accounting has in not just being the source of historical data, but being able to use systems to capture just a little far in the future, right? To be able to say, hey, this is where we're going to be. I think in the past, that's what had been missing with some of my roles, is that there was that huge silo, right? This is where you stop and this is where finance starts. And now that, the future of work is people don't care about the silos. They just want information to make better decisions. And if you're partnering really, really strongly with your finance team, you'll find out that there's a lot of give and take there too. And so I tend to think of us as where the assumptions start, right? Before finance can set those assumptions and start triangulating, 3-5 years in the future, they're going to need something that's really solid to start on. Because if your assumptions are wrong, it doesn't matter what you extrapolate, it's going to end up in the wrong ballpark anyway. So I think there is that. And then there's also the rigor that I think most accountants really bring to just data analysis. I'm not a data analyst by any means, I promise. But I can tell you that because I look at the numbers so much, if someone brought me information that didn't make sense, I would probably be one of the first to be like, well, can you explain that a little bit more? I tend not to say that's wrong. I just want to know more so that I understand the context a little bit better. And that is helpful, right? Because if you're not constantly looking at that, it probably would have just been, you're good to go and nobody would be the wiser. So in that sense, I think not just supporting finance, but also making sure that our team leads just look, you have a budget, you should know where you are. If you're coming to me to get information on your budget, I have failed. And so we should be having those productive conversations of how to get things done, as opposed to being the no guys. Because accounting, they always tell, oh, you're going to say no. I'm like, no, I'm not going to say no. I'm just asking. I'm just asking questions so that you think it through a little bit more, right? So that's where I think that accounting and finance can really help the business, especially when it's scaling the way Gem is.
Awesome. So our last high level question, we ask it to everyone that has been on the podcast, and we will continue to ask it. It's very career oriented. So we just like to ask, like, what's one thing you know now that maybe you wish you knew at the start of your career, or that you tell somebody who's earlier on the path that you've taken?
I would say take time to really know what your strengths are and what you bring to the table. Coming here, I was an immigrant, right? So I immigrated here, I started school, and then I got the job with KPMG, and then met my husband, and then never left. But one of the things that I really had a hard time with, apart from culture shock in the first place, it was just not really understanding why I thought the way I did. And in true honesty, very few of my accounting, because I was literally on audit staff, would go to a controller and be like, so why are you doing this again? Like, I just want to understand. I really wanted to understand. And if you're surrounded by people who don't have that bent, you do feel not just different, but you feel somewhat devalued because you're not bringing any value to that work right then. And so what I wish had happened to me would be someone say, hey, you know what? You have this unique talent. for ideation and possibilities. And even if you're not going to work on this specific audit the way they did it last year, you would be helpful doing this for KPMG, right? But I didn't have that. And so I think if I had had a stronger sense of self in terms of this is what I bring to the table, I am going to help you be better, damn it. I would have been more motivated, I think, in speaking out and bringing those obscure thoughts that people didn't care about and really, really sticking to it, right? You know, speaking your truth and be like, you know, this should be better. So, and this was pre-SOX too. So now that we have SOX, I'm like, I knew it. I knew there were better ways to do shit. Things. But that was time. So my advice every time I talk to any accountant or any finance or data, whatever they are, make sure you know what your unique talents are. And that way you can bring it to where you work, because that's what adds value. It's not just having this body of knowledge and being a CPA and doing all these things. It really is that unique aspect or perspective that you bring that's really going to help your company grow. That's my take.
I can't wait to add that to my list of interview questions for new folks.
No doubt.
It's a good one.
Oh, really?
I'm taking this as a pep talk. I'm putting it on my wall. I'm going to get the Temi quote and be like, great, this is career advice for all of us, not just finance and accounting.
I think I just wish, looking back now, you know, hindsight is 20/20. I'm like, I wish I had asked those questions instead of just writing it down and going back and saying like, what was that again? And why are you doing this? And like not being so worried when people would get really defensive, and just having those skills to be able to disarm them and really get to the meat of it. I'm lucky now. I get to ask those questions and people are like, yes, you should be asking those questions. But when I was starting out, it was like, who the heck are you? And how dare you tell me what to do? So anyway.
Awesome. Well, I think we're just about at time. Temi, if you want, where should people go to learn more about you if they want to follow up with questions, or where can they learn more about Gem? Like this is your time to shine. Where can we find you and all the work you're doing?
So gem.com. No, but seriously, gem.com is if you want any information on our company, it's out there. We pride ourselves on transparency. And so a lot of our values, what we like to do, what we're building, is literally out there. For me, I'm on LinkedIn, Temi Vasco. That's it. Other than that, I'm good.
Sometimes we get some Twitter handles.
I am on Twitter, but that's like, I don't think I actually use Twitter for anything other than just to like lurk and look at funny conversations. I would not even think that anyone would reach out to me that way. But LinkedIn is typically I check that more frequently. Twitter is just for fun.
Awesome.
Well, Temi, thank you so much again for joining. I thought this was a really great conversation. Appreciate all the time that you've taken to chat with us. It was great to have you on the roll forward, and hope to talk again soon.
Same here. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Anytime.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you for checking out this episode of The Roll Forward. This show is powered by Mosaic, the strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow The Roll Forward wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit mosaic.tech/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.